Well, welcome back. It's been a funny week for Christians. The weekend started with the horrific bombing and subsequent shootings in Oslo by Anders Behring Breivik, who's been described in the media as a fundamentalist Christian who's trying to save the world from Islam. Then on Sunday, TVNZ finally broadcast a documentary it's been sitting on for some months called Jesus the Cold Case, in which TV investigator Brian Bruce questioned some of the fundamentals of the Christian faith. There's that word again. Well, to help us unpack what's really going on, I'm joined by church historian Peter Lineham, who is Associate Professor of History at Massey University's Albany campus. He's also the Regional Director for the College of Humanities and Social Science. OK, Peter, $64 million question. What is a fundamentalist?
Well, a fundamentalist originally was a term used to define those who wanted in the 1910s to clarify what were the fundamentals of the faith in the face of the new liberalism, the new Christian liberalism, which was increasingly moving apart from the traditional gospel texts. But thereafter, that group of Americans became associated with a particular group who brought divisions to the Presbyterians and other congregations and became known as those who absolutely rejected any dealing with current social and cultural issues. And so they became regarded as those who were both politically exceptionally conservative and religiously exceptionally conservative. Now the trouble is, the word is not a neutral one. A lot of people get called fundamentalists. In other words, it's a slang word. It's a word that insinuates, in effect, that you've left your brains behind, that you're not thinking for yourself, that you are taking the most conservative line without any reason on any issue. So if they use the term Christian fundamentalist, I can assure you they've got a pretty heavy invective involved in it.
So when the media are calling Anders Breivik a Christian fundamentalist, it's not really accurate, it's just labelling.
It's a piece of nonsense, in fact. It's an indication of a liberal media reacting to somebody with a strange religious viewpoint that they don't understand. Well, what term's available? Christian fundamentalist. Perfect. And so, home and hosed. But in fact, there's not a single element that can establish this case. Every aspect about this strange man would seem to indicate that although he does seem to have had some sort of conversion experience and been baptised in his teenage years, now 17 years later, all the aspects, I ploughed through this enormous treatise that he wanted to release to the world, and this was really a publicity stunt. I think he's better known for what he's against than what he's for. Against the Marxists, who he thinks are invading every aspect of European world. There's a lot of evidence against that these days, but those in Scandinavia tend to be very sensitive to that because of the proximity of Russia. And then secondly, he's against Islamic presence in Europe, which, while not particularly acute in Norway, I mean, is a very significant factor in recession-ridden Europe at the moment, and so there's a lot of sensitivities around. But what's he for? Well, the only thing I can tell you what he's for is for a weird world of Knights Templar revived, shades of angels and demons and other, religious trash. That is this Christian fundamentalism? I mean, he, at one point, sets out to define who he will accept in his movement. And he says he'll accept anybody who's a cultural Christian. And then he says, what if you don't believe in God? Can you be a cultural Christian? Oh, yes, he said, you're a Christian atheist. Well, I'd say, actually, the man's a liberal, if anything. Certainly not in the traditional range of Christian conservatives.
Well, let's move on to the other Christian fundamental question that's come up for us this week. And this is the documentary that was on TV1 on
Well, don't
Sunday.
get me started on this.
we do have to be finished before the end of the programme. Now, this was called Jesus the Cold Case. It allegedly went into some of the fundamentals, I guess, of the Christian faith. And it seemed to me, from watching it, it took pot shots at them. If you can do it in less than 4 minutes, what was your reaction to the programme when you saw it?
My reaction to the programme was it was a very clever piece of journalistic fantasy which had as its essential theme, and I think if you understand its essential theme, then the bits fall into place. And that didn't become entirely clear until the programme ends in a concentration camp, where he's effectively saying that Christianity is responsible for the slaughter of the Jews. And then you begin to understand why he needs to claim that the Christian Gospels have shifted the blame for the death of Jesus onto the Jews, whereas in fact it plainly belongs with Pontius Pilate. So that's the methodology used, but the end is very clear, is to declare that Christianity is held together by an intensity of hatred against the Jews. Now, you state that case. Well, if this really were the case, wouldn't one expect to see it elsewhere in the New Testament than just in the Gospels? And its complete absence from the rest of the New Testament suggests this is a strange reading anyway.
I mean, I've spoken to a couple of people who've phoned in, having seen the programme, who were quite concerned that he picked up on inconsistencies within the Gospels, within each other, in that they described events sometimes quite differently. And he was saying that effectively the Gospels were hearsay evidence rather than eyewitness evidence, and in a court of law should be judged in that way. What would you say to people who were concerned by the apparent inconsistencies?
I think it's very true that the Gospels are different from each other. And moreover, you've got to be careful about saying all the Gospels are eyewitness accounts, because very, very clearly Luke says that he's not an eyewitness. He's a historian. You know, he's a gatherer of evidence, which he carefully cites. And Matthew probably is not written by Matthew, and probably is also not an eyewitness recorder, whereas Mark and John seem to make slightly different claims to what they're saying. Now, I'd say, yes, I think you will find in the modern sense some differences of stories. It's very hard putting together a chronology of the last days of Jesus. It doesn't say it can't be done, but what we don't do when we're faced with discrepancies is to say, oh, they're all wrong. We rather try to say, what's the most logical way to make sense of where these differences come from? That's what I'm interested in.
It's a fascinating subject. I could talk to you all day, but I suspect we have to go to a commercial break. Peter, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you.